welcome back to the Empowered Intuitive Academy podcast. I am one of your hosts, Taylor Henderson, and with me is my beautiful co-host, Petra Costa. And you can find us at the Empowered Intuitive Academy on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, Spotify. Hopefully that's where you're watching this from. Today we are chatting about Easter. What came first, Jesus or the egg? And from what we've researched, the answer is not as straightforward as everyone wants to make out that it is.
Absolutely.
There's two sides of the argument. And I know we're filming this a little bit after Easter, but honestly, I'm glad for it because the amount of misinformation spread on both sides, not just Christians. And I think that's going to be a takeaway from this episode is that we're not here to knock religion in itself, but we're here to get down to the truth of how these traditions evolve, but also the pagan claims of where this holiday comes from. And so we're going to unpack that in this episode. But I suppose we should start by talking about what is Easter today and where did the name Easter come from? Because that's going to segue into the plethora of shit that I've found on this.
Now, obviously, Easter is a celebration and also a time of mourning for when Jesus was crucified.
Yeah.
And then obviously he was taken down from the cross and then he was resurrected on the Sunday. So Friday is a time of mourning, which is why, on Good Friday that you don't eat meat as a sign of respect.
Yeah, you don't eat red meat. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's all of that around the Easter religious tradition. And then obviously on the Sunday we celebrate joyously because of his resurrection.
Yeah.
Rebirth, etc. So that's pretty simple.
Yeah.
And there in some countries the naming of their Easter is simple. So it's coming from the word Passover, so it's called Pasqua or Bonaparte. It's a version of Paschal or Pasqua, depending on whether you're French origins, Italian, Spanish,
and that
etc.
descends from the Jewish tradition of honoring the Passover, which was when they left Egypt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's where some of the words come from. But then when we talk about the actual origins of the word Easter, now the reason this is interesting to me is because my sister actually contacted me and said, "Oh, did you know that the naming of Easter actually came from this origins?" And I go, I don't think it's as simple as that. That seems to be the new age belief or the new theory that's getting put forward.
Yeah.
And that's in relation to the word Easter coming from, I'll let you go with these words because we all know my pronunciation is very terrible.
Ostara, which comes from Eostre, which is an Anglo-Saxon Germanic word related to the goddess Eostre or Ostara, and also another Germanic goddess called Hethra, which no one knows about. But
now you were talking to me about this that I found really interesting because even in the world as we know it, where people are saying Ostra is coming from the spring goddess that is about renewal and resurrection and all of that kind of things, about that's almost like the cycle of life and rebirth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like a spring goddess.
Yeah, a spring goddess. Yeah.
A spring goddess from pagan times, like pagan religious goddess.
Yeah.
But they even got her wrong in terms of some of the epithets and some of the things that are with her.
Yeah.
Are out of sync. Is that correct?
Yes. So the common misconception and what's being trademarked as truth right now with Easter is that Easter was something that the church took from the pagans. In many ways they did, but not in the ways that we think. and that it's actually the festival which honors Ostara, which is the Germanic goddess of the spring, and her symbols are supposedly the hare and the egg. Now, when we look at that from an archaeological, anthropological perspective, that is far from the truth. There's actually not much that we can find on her in terms of worship and in festivals. But what we do find is writings from a Anglo-Saxon monk. His name was Bede, and he found that in the heathen traditions of his people, because they were you got to think about the fact that in this time they were moving away from the pagan beliefs because the church didn't approve, and these folk practices were being integrated into mainstream Christianity so that they could have some modicum of peace and that they could move forward, and that these people could still have their practices under the umbrella of Christianity.
Yep.
So he finds that and observes these festivals surrounding Hethra, which was actually in March, which is around the time that we would normally have Easter today, and Ostara, which is actually an April goddess. And we got to remember, these are Northern Hemisphere deities. These are Northern Hemisphere correspondences. So to begin with, in the South, we don't correspond with that. In the South, we're going into a time of descent, a time of death, and we're having our last harvest. Where in the North, they're just beginning that cycle again. So Hethra, obviously, she was wiped out. There's no data on her whatsoever. But Ostara, there was minimal data to work with. And it was actually one of the brothers Grimm, so Jacob Grimm, who took the concept of Ostara and created and reconstructed a narrative around her and who she was based on these writings from Bede, this Anglo-Saxon monk. So we get, and there's also a little bit of Norse influence in there as well. So we've got Ostri, Ostra, Ostara, Ostore, and traditionally she was honored at the equinox of spring as a spring goddess, but she was not associated with hares and she was not associated with eggs. Now, we did go into what hares symbolize for this, because I mean, for me, animistically, looking outside in the north, I would assume hares would be in abundance around the spring equinox because that's their breeding season. So it is kind of, akin to the fact that they would be a likely symbol, but they weren't traditionally recorded as her symbol. So, and Petra, did you look into a little bit more about the hares?
I did, but there's one point I want to make in relation to the naming conventions, because there's a couple of things that actually got my goat when I was reading it, and I just need to explain it.
Yeah.
So apparently the new widespread consensus is that the word from the Christian designation of Easter week, as in albus, is a Latin phrase. And it's understood that it's the plural of alba for the dawn. And that it became Easter through the fact of the word ostarum, which is the Old High German. Okay.
Yes.
Now, I just find the reason I find this interesting is because it is accompanied with this explanation as to why this is our new widespread consensus. Because it says, given the determination with which Christians combated all forms of paganism, the belief in multiple deities, it appears a rather dubious presumption to assume they took the name from a pagan spring goddess.
Yeah, I actually have notes on the that Alban Elia.
Yes.
I'm probably not pronouncing it right, because there's often this assumption that these pagan traditions that are being adopted or taken are like Celtic origin, and some of them are, but some of them aren't. But this is like the Celtic translation or the Gaelic translation. So Alban Alia, and Alban Alia in Gaelic means the light of the earth that returns after the winter from the other world. So, but even in this book that I'm reading that from, it says Ostara is the Norse goddess of spring. So
Yeah.
it's
So
like we've taken Jacob Grimm and Bede have taken this one figure and they've decided that they're going to reconstruct and add a little bit here and there
yeah,
to keep the folks appeased so that they can have somewhat of their traditions mixed
yeah,
with their own traditions and
yeah.
label
And
that as fact.
and the thing is, this assertion here that because Christians combated all forms of paganism, it's a rather dubious presumption. They're not my words; they're the words in um, quite well-known encyclopedia bodies in talking about Easter.
Yeah.
I think we're trying to reconstruct history a little bit here as well, and this is where
Yeah.
I get annoyed
Yeah.
because we are 100% aware of the fact that modern religions have taken on symbolism from cultures and practices that predate them.
Yeah.
That's unfortunately that's provable. Yet we're still making assertions here that no, that's not the case. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, dudes, it is the case.
Well, when
And
you've got the High German that literally translates to the English Easter, like that evolution of that word,
yeah,
that
yeah,
that language. Yeah.
yeah. And I just look, I think when we're looking at linguistics,
Yeah.
it's very easy for us to find any word because if you get that word and you translate it into Latin and then you take it out to ancient Greek and then you're moving on over here,
Yeah.
we have to accept the fact that mistranslations are happening all of the time.
Yeah.
So I think to be able to actually definitively state where the word came from is where we have a problem. We're not going to be able to definitively state it. It's only ever going to be an opinion.
Yeah.
And it might be the predominant opinion of a time, but it's only ever going to be an opinion because unless we can go back in time and do a Bill and Ted, we are not going to know it.
Yeah.
So, and I think I think that's the thing that I have about this is just look, we all need to take a chill pill. It seems likely with the fact that we've got the hares and the eggs that there is a link to pagan goddesses of spring. But it seems so. So let's go into the hare, okay? Because the hare got me upset as well. I've got to say, because obviously we have hares all throughout history as being a symbol of fertility and
Yeah.
rebirth and a lot of wonderful symbolism around the hare.
And when you
Have
look
no,
into the symbolism of the hare further, it makes sense for them to be involved in a tradition that is about the cycles of rebirth, life, and death, because they were dubbed to be like these little go-betweens between the gods and the people. It was said by Indo-European, accounts that they believed the hares to be sacred because they would tunnel under the ground, and under the ground meant they had access to the other
to
world,
the other world. Exactly.
and the Fey realms.
And I love it because I didn't realize that hares have been given burial rights
Yeah,
alongside humans during at the Neolithic age in Europe.
yeah,
So we're not talking this as being a new thing and say, you've got a better idea than me, but Neolithic is like before Bronze Age, yeah?
yeah. Neolithic's like the start of our agricultural era when we're moving away from the hunter-gatherer lifestyles into more settled living, and we're
Yeah,
growing our own crops. And for the Gaels and the Celts and that, they're experimenting with metals and
yeah,
blacksmithing and things. um
yeah.
so yeah.
So we're talking what? What is that? 20,000 years, 30,000 years back?
Yeah.
We've found evidence, and this is not an opinion. This is we found evidence that hares are being buried alongside humans
And
from way back then.
this is not a new thing that humans have been doing.
No,
We've been doing it since we started placing relevance on animals and things around us, even back in the Paleolithic. And we've continued that into, antiquity. Like ancient Egyptians mummified fucking everything. Fucking everything.
everything.
Like lion cubs and all sorts of shit in their tombs. Like,
It's like, what's her name? I want it, Daddy. I want it.
You shall have it in the afterlife as well. Mummify that croc right now.
You want the golden goose or the what is it? The new one, the squirrel?
Yeah. Oh,
yeah. So hares have been revered for a very, very long time.
yeah.
It flows through into Caesar's time. We get into the Renaissance, and it's in a lot of artworks.
Yeah.
Now, this is the interesting link back to Christianity and Easter, because we've revered the hares over here. We've included them in a lot of artworks. They were associated with goddesses quite strongly. I'm just trying to remember the goddess Aphrodite and Eros. Are depicted in a lot of the paintings and artworks of having hair or rabbits with them.
Yeah.
Now, what we then have is the Virgin Mary is now being depicted in the Renaissance era with having a white hare or rabbit with her.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the hare has gone from being representative of life and rebirth and all of this. We've come to the conclusion when we're analysing this that it is a symbol of the fact that the Virgin Mary overcame sexual temptation.
See, that doesn't sit well with me, because why would she be holding a hare, a living hare, in her hands? That, to me, is more of a totemic, sympathetic symbol of her fertility.
Yes.
If she supposedly overcome this thing, like, shouldn't she be like holding a hare in a cage or?
That's what I was saying. Like, I don't understand. Would she not be turning her back to two hares humping in the background?
Yeah,
like, would that not be a better symbol of affecting? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So again, I think this is
like that though.
Yeah, I think again we're putting our views on things and trying to rewrite a narrative that suits.
That feeds into what you found around the witches and the hares as well.
Yeah, I'll go into this because this analysis of the Renaissance art and people, it's a symbol of this, and I'm sort of like it's a white hare, so it's like there's a level of purity involved in the white hair.
Yeah,
I can understand if you had, the Virgin Mary, she's all on white and she's looking her glorious self.
yeah.
I get that, but then if the hair is supposed to represent something that needs to be overcame and what made her special in and of itself, so like it's an evil almost that she's overcome, I'm not exactly certain as to why they painted it as a beautiful white hair. Like, I really can't understand. Like I said, I would have thought it would be either a dead hare hanging up over there or them doing the deed in the corner.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we move on. And we're talking about Northern European traditions along hares and what hares mean.
Yeah.
Now, apparently witches in Northern Europe are heavily associated with hares, because that was one of the forms that they transformed into.
Right.
And with all of the hares going around, it goes just to show that the witches were running amok in Northern Europe. And they believed the witches were sucking the life force and the life energy out of the community.
And we must have bred like rabbits to them.
Just like
prolific.
Dirty old rabbits, apparently. And there was the idea that of banishment around Easter, that there was these festivals and traditions and rituals that were performed in Europe that were a way to promise new life, to symbolically oppose the life-draining activities of witches in winter, and one of those is the idea comes from a festival called Osterfeuer, which is Easter fire, which was a celebration in Germany when they put up the big fire. And apparently that was to scare all of the witches away.
Right.
And then at the feasting time, you would have a nice chomp chomp on a rabbit or a hare to symbolize that you've overpowered the witches. And now the only problem I have with this along the time of that all being done,
Yeah.
those people were still sending their children out to run amongst the Easter hares to
Yeah.
collect the eggs, and it being quite a benevolent thing to do. So I'm saying here again, pick which one you want to go with.
Yeah.
Like,
Literally make your mind
are
up.
the hares representative witches that need to be eaten and consumed
Yeah.
because and that's a way of, just sticking it to the witches? Or are they something to be joyously run through the fields with as you find the beautiful eggs that symbolize so much?
Yeah.
So
And it kind of,
I,
I literally, I just had the thought of like, you're eating this symbol of fertility and rebirth in the cycles of life, and you're doing it in a way to bastardize the previous associations that were pagan or folk, to be like, look at this symbol, it's ours now. Like we consume it, therefore it is ours. And that
yeah,
really,
sorry, that's a very good
that
point.
sympathetic sort of taking on of an energy when you consume something or you embody something. And then in the early, and then in the early Christian traditions and today, they're literally doing that when they're eating the body of Christ.
Yeah,
It is the number one symbol of birth and rebirth.
yeah, yeah.
You guys can't believe that. You guys can't have those traditions, but we can.
I just feel like there's a lot of grim kind of stuff going on here where people are rewriting it. They're seeing these festivals and have no freaking idea
Yeah.
of what they're about. And they go, oh, well, okay, because the hair symbolizes X, it must have been that they were doing Y.
Yeah.
And why couldn't it just be that you were putting up a freaking great big bonfire
Yeah.
to symbolize community and a way of all joining together because it's just a celebration, and that you just happen to eat something that is prolific
Yeah.
because of the
Because
natural
it was
cycle of the
abundant. It was
because
abundant.
they're abundant at that time. Like,
Having gratitude to that because it is abundant and that is a bountiful
yes.
earth at that time.
And so I'm not exactly going out of my way and calling bullshit on this. I do believe they thought witches. Unfortunately, we've got historical evidence to back the fact that people had some very crazy belief systems around witches. What I am pointing out here is the fact that either we're doing a really crap job of piecing together the logical processes of the time, or the logical processes of the time were really fucked up. I don't think there's any middle ground there in
That
terms of
reminds
that.
me of actually, and something that should probably be noted is the big influence that Gerald Gardner had over the incorporation of Ostara being one of the points of the wheel of the year where we celebrate the spring equinox, because we know well that he pieced itty bitty pieces from here, there, and everywhere, goddess, pagan, earth-based traditions to construct this wheel of the year in the Wiccan faith, which, not all witches are Wiccan, not all Wiccans are witches, but it was literally that basis of modern day paganism, which started in the 60s. So unless he knew some really dope anthropology, archaeologists, people that could definitively tell him that this what they did with Ostara back in the day, he is also committed, he's contributed to this reconstruction. And then, and another point in that too is that there's nothing wrong with celebrating Ostara as the spring equinox in that fashion. There's nothing wrong with honoring a goddess of spring at the springtime. That it's been done since antiquity, and a lot of her influences in this reconstruction as well that I could find through comparisons are Aurora or Eos, ancient Rome and Greece. They were the goddesses of the dawn, so the first light, leaning back to that Albert and Leah, which is Gaelic for the first light, and also Floralia, which is the goddess of flowers in ancient Rome. So there's nothing wrong with that, but at least have some now you can have a little bit of background information on where that actually evolved from, and who else's mythologies and symbols and things you're incorporating into this figure that we're painting as Ostara. And it's actually funny because feeding back into the tradition of Easter and why it's celebrated, being this cycle of life, death, rebirth, Floralia in her mythology is said to have touched Juno with a magical herb which led her to conceive Mars without the help of Jupiter. Now we were
so that sounds like immaculate conception.
Immaculate conception. Now we were talking about the Mother Mary having the hair.
Yes.
So, and she is she not the mother of Christ, who was immaculately conceived? So, in lots of ways, this actually loops around to where these traditions began way back in our Neolithic,
antiquity
past.
There is immaculate conception as resurrection occurring in most cultures dating back from a very long time ago.
Yeah.
We'll just say that. Okay, so egg. We all have consumed a Easter egg this Christmas. This Easter. Some of us might have. I was going to say I've been waiting for them because I've got myself hooked on the caramel ones.
Yes.
But anyway, where does this come from? The use of the egg. It would seem it's linked with Easter. It's linked with spring goddesses, etc. But I'm going to take it one step further and say that in many ancient cultures, Slavic cultures, they worshipped a sun god. It's got a lot of consonants in it, not many vowels. But so we'll go with Desbo. The sun was important because it warmed the earth and was therefore the source of all life.
Yeah.
Eggs, decorated with natural symbols, were starting to be integrated into their spring rituals because they served a talisman. Now, why was the egg a talisman of the sun god? Because birds were deemed to be the god's chosen creations because they could fly obviously to the heavens and spend time in the earth.
Right.
So they were
you've got another animal symbol as a psychopomp from
exactly. And because obviously humans were not able to fly or get near to the gods, and they couldn't readily catch birds, they could obtain the eggs.
Yeah.
And the eggs therefore became a symbol, a revered symbol of magic, of the power of the heavens, of the power of the gods.
And it's actually funny you say that because a lot of in the Druidic belief, which is linking back to Celtic, Druids had eggs as a symbol of their magic and their order. And then you've also got the Dionysian mysteries and mystery cults at the Bacchus. They would also consecrate holy eggs. You've also got Hindu, Japan, and China, all dyeing eggs, all honoring the sacred cosmic egg, which, if we go back to our divine masculine and feminine podcast, is where the birth of the universe began from the cosmic egg and the androgynous being within. Sounds like Jesus. And then, and even in ancient Egypt and Babylon, we've got this egg worship.
Yep. Yeah. So the egg actually probably has more prolonged, recurrence throughout different ancient cultures than, say, the hair does even.
Yeah.
It's just, it's really, and it is a magical object. And you were deemed to have been consuming a bit of the magic when you ate the egg.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was also the miraculous, again, you were saying about rebirth, etc. Of just the way of watching an egg, and when something hatches out of it, it is a magical thing. So
yeah, exactly.
There was a lot of stuff around the eggs there. Then we talk about, so we started to dye them, then we started to color them.
Yeah.
Now the dyeing and coloration of them varies from culture to culture. Some of them are traditionally red eggs.
Yes.
And when we dye the egg red, it is said that the red is about the blood of Christ. that we are dyeing them red to symbolize what he shed for us. But and that might be why people are dyeing them, because let's remember, when you're dyeing your egg, you're the one that knows why you're dyeing it that color.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So let's just remember that if I'm dyeing my egg red because I want to symbolize all that Jesus has sacrificed,
yeah,
you can't dispute that.
yeah,
No one can dispute that. But what we will say is there's actually historical record too that puts the dyeing of the red eggs back pre-Christian.
yeah,
And it was a symbol of the womb and rebirth.
Yeah.
Which I find really, really interesting.
The blood of the womb. Do you want to know a little funny tale about that I learned recently about the dyeing of red eggs? So Mary Magdalene, right? Love that bitch. She was there for Jesus's crucifixion, and she was there for his resurrection. She anointed his feet and dried his feet with her hair. She was one of his most beloved apostles. And again, the church has painted her as the town whore in need of redemption, who could only be saved by Jesus. For some reason, they got a thing against, women of power, right? Women of substance.
But let's point out, though, that one of their greatest figures did not have the same prejudice.
No.
Revered her above all others.
Beloved, and it's said in the Bible, in the Gospels, that the other apostles were jealous of her because he had such a special bond with her. And I'm like, oh, maybe that's because she was his wife, she was his consort, she was his everything, and he was that to her. And there were a lot of things like in this research where, Mary got it. Mary got his teachings. Mary got what Jesus was getting at. Whereas the other apostles were seeing it through various lenses of their own personal prejudices. But we're not here to dissect the Bible. I'm here to tell a story about Mary. So after Mary is there for the resurrection, and Jesus tells her, go forth, tell the apostles and tell everyone I have returned. I have resurrected and I've done this for your sins. She goes to the emperor of Rome, because it is Rome at this time who have crucified him. And she tells them, Jesus has risen, Yeshua has risen. And he goes, Jesus has not risen, no more than this egg is red. And then in front of them, a holy miracle occurs, the egg turns red. And so in those early traditions, that is why the egg is painted and dyed red.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And but the painting the eggs, like we used to do that as coming from a German background.
Yeah.
We dyed eggs but we did multicolored, and we would though. I was interested to read where there's some Slavic cultures that actually use like a wax stick, and they draw on it with wax stick. We actually had those. You could get a special Easter pack that you could put stickers on, but you could draw that so that when you either used a wax candle or a special wax stick, that you could draw the patterns on, and then when you dye the egg, it would obviously not take the dye in certain spots. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
What I found really interesting was that in the Slavic cultures, it was predominantly Ukrainian was where I got a lot of the referencing from.
Yeah.
But it is across a lot of Slavic cultures. There's symbolism within what they draw. It's not just try to draw the fanciest pattern you can. The number 40 becomes a huge magical symbol in this drawing of the eggs, and you try to get as much magic into the egg as possible.
Yeah, we say it, sacred geometry, making a lattice.
And I know, right? And it was interesting because I'm sure there'll be a lot of people out there saying right now, well 40's a very, very strong magical number in the Bible. But when I looked into it, I don't want to get sidetracked because it was a fascinating subject, and when we do a podcast on numerology, we can get into it. I can assure you the 40 references has nothing to do with biblical references. They have some amazing magical processes around the shape, the geometry they use, whether they're triangles, whatever shapes they use is in imbuing power, additional power into the egg, so that when it's consumed and or just sat next to something as an ornament, because a lot of these aren't on eggs that are going to be peeled and eaten.
No.
They're actually around the house as talismans.
Yep. Talismans.
And I think that's it's gorgeous. But it just again goes to show that eggs aren't, then they may appear as one thing to one person, and we see them as rebirth. We see them, maybe they're linked to a sun god, maybe they're linked to the concept of resurrection, and all of these things, but they can also mean a lot of other things. And I think the mistake people are trying to make is by saying, oh, well, everywhere we've used hairs, therefore it needs to mean X.
Yeah.
And then everyone we used eggs, so it's got to mean Y.
Yeah.
So these people were worshipping the same people that these people are worshipping.
Yeah.
I just like my chalky Easter eggs. I run around the garden and I look for them. But this year I actually had, flakes around the garden, and I had some blooming, caramella koalas and a couple of Freddo frogs. I don't really care if it's an egg or not. So, when they look back on what we were doing, in 2,000 years, when they look back and they go, oh, look, they were very heavily religious. Look how they went with those eggs and those hairs. And it's like, dude, dude, I'm very, I must admit, I do get really strong. There is only one day of the year where I won't eat meat, and that is Good Friday.
Yeah.
More as a mark of respect to all of the people that believe so strongly.
Well, I grew up with that same premise of you don't eat red meat on Good Friday. And we weren't a religious family. We're not Christians. I have people in my family who are, but I'm not, I'm not one to go to an Easter service or go to church. But it was something my mother was raised with. So she believed that you don't eat red meat on Good Friday because that's what her mother did. And so that's how we were raised, and that's what we do. Like sometimes we we can simply just carry on these traditions because our ancestors did them, and then other times it's and we can choose to leave behind the ones we don't resonate with.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've touched on a lot of the different things around Easter. I just want to go into, because my brain had a little bit of a heart attack trying to understand why there are different dates for Easter in amongst the different calendars. And unfortunately, they sent me
symbolically though that we should.
What?
Hot cross buns.
Oh, hot cross buns.
Hot cross buns.
I remember what I was told in school as to what they represented. I must admit, I did not research them at all.
So
Let's just see.
And hot cross buns, obviously people are going to associate that with Jesus dying on the cross, and
I was told it was the stone that was rolled away from the cave, and then obviously the cross of his crucifixion was put on the stone of the cave. That's what I was told.
There's that, but did you know that initially hot cross buns, and this can also link into the linguistic evolution of the word Easter, they were made in honor of the Queen of Heaven, of Ishtar, of Inanna, back in ancient Mesopotamia and Babylon. They would make her, there's an excerpt from Jeremiah. It says, children gathered the wood, fathers made the fire, women made the dough to make the bread for the Queen of Heaven, pour drink to the other gods. So in that sense, it's a pagan tradition. It's a polytheistic offering to the divine, to the Queen of Heaven, which I'm sensing a theme in these women having a little bit more to do with these traditions than they're made up.
We've got some boss bitches coming up here, gotta be honest.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go boring then, because I couldn't understand. This is the boring bit to finish on. I couldn't understand the difference between why Easter was occurring in one religion on one day, like Greek Easter or Orthodox Easters are different to the rest of the days of Easter.
Yeah.
And for people who didn't know it, it comes down to one of two things. But the main thing is the Julian calendar versus the Gregorian calendar, which I have always called it something completely different. I've never even read it properly to know it's Gregorian. But basically they did their maths wrong.
Yeah.
Way back in the day. Julius was just all over the shop, and he thought it was 365.25 days
Yeah.
was in a solar year.
Yep.
And that is just not the case. So he was out, and they were noticing that the equinoxes weren't in sync with when they should have been. So they were losing or gaining days. I think it was 12 days that it had gotten out of sync with.
Yeah.
And because Easter was such a predominant religious ceremony, and it was linked to equinoxes in terms of timing of when they expected it to happen.
Yes.
They were looking into introducing this new calendar. And there was a lot of toing and froing. There was a lot of people who put this forward and tried to get this over the line before Pope Gregory did it. But they eventually changed it so that it was more in sync, and that we wouldn't have this loss of days during. And it's not as if we still had 365 days of the year and 366 on a leap year. It was just the addition of additional years that we'd have a leap year to include when there were 400s rather than just fours. So for anyone who likes that kind of detail.
Yeah, we're coming back round to the numerology.
we're coming back around to numerology big time in different things here. I will also point out that originally in Asia Minor, Christians observed the day of the crucifixion as the same day the Jewish people celebrated their Passover.
Yes, yeah.
Which was on the 14th day of the first full moon of spring. So the 14th day, it was not attributed to a Friday or a Sunday or anything of that nature. It was the 14th day, and then they had 16th day after Nisan is the day where the resurrection was supposed to have occurred.
Yeah.
But that was causing a bit of discombobulation. And the churches, obviously because they have Sunday celebratory mass, they wanted Easter to be in line with that. So that it then it was celebrated the first Sunday after the 14th day of Nisan, rather than being the 14th day after Nisan. So they still kept the fact. I'm sorry, I did not research what Nisan actually refers to, but I'm assuming that's got to do with the full moon.
Bookmark that for all of everyone listening. Google for us what Nisan actually is.
I know, right? I want to know that, to be honest. Anyway, so there was all of that, and slowly it got adopted. But because Orthodox religions run off the Julian calendar, that is why there is a date difference, and the date difference will continue to expand. So whether it's 10 or 12 days, it will get more and more because the Julian calendar there's no way for it to gain days, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I did, and the last thing I did find interesting, and I'm just going to mention it for people like me who love this kind of crap, I did not realize there were so many methods I thought if someone asked me the question on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, of how long does it take the sun to travel, so the earth to travel around the sun, I thought that would be a pretty stock standard response that this is what it is, Petra.
Yeah.
It's 365.25636 days is what I would have thought. But just so everybody knows, there's two different ways of doing the calendar, and there is one that is called the orbital revolution around the sun, which is the sidereal year. And that basically works on how the earth travels around the sun in relationship to other celestial bodies as the alignment tool. Funnily enough, that's the number that the Julian calendar is closest to.
Yeah.
So the Julian calendar gets that number righter, if you know what I mean. But the tropical year or solar year, which is the year we use from an astronomical perspective, is the one that will actually, which is the Gregorian calendar, is much closer to, is actually the measurement of the orbit as to when it becomes 360 degrees. And the difference of that is it's actually measuring equinox to equinox.
Yeah.
So that's why you'll never get any coming out of swing with the equinoxes, because that one is measured in that fashion.
So we can say from those sort of different forms of calculations and measurements on where the equinoxes fall in the year, and that is how they sort of gauge where Easter sits in our modern calendar as well as they did in antiquity.
Absolutely.
the equinox in itself, but we're using it as a timer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's setting the marker, and it was very important. There was a lot of discombobulation amongst the churches. It was actually known as the Paschal controversies because they all had a big old dust up over when Easter was actually going to fall and how it was calculated, etc. So I
Yeah.
just thought that was an interesting topic to finish up on
Definitely
because it's
interesting.
always been something that I've never been able to understand.
Yeah.
Like, how do we work that? And I
Yeah.
also find there's something, just call me old fashioned, but I really find this thing beautiful that even religions that can be so quick to discount so many things
Mm.
are still using a moon cycle as a point of measurement.
Which is funny because the moon is heavily linked with the hair, being that
Yeah.
they birth every 28 days. They go
Yes.
every 28 days. And, that's when their litters are conceived and birth, which is aligned with our feminine cycles and things like that for
It's,
most.
and Easter in a way is very, very linked to a cyclical thing
It is.
of
And
death and rebirth.
yeah, exactly. And I just really want to touch on some of these rebirth cycle myths that have led to these traditions, because I feel like if we don't do that, we've not done this topic justice. I know
Yep, go.
we've got about 15 minutes to break it down, so I'll break it down as easy as
Okay.
I can. So starting back with the buns and Inanna, um, there in Babylon, there is a mythology around Inanna who makes the descent into the underworld to restore her sort of insight and her vision through a shadow journey. And she, as a deity, and it's funny because Ishtar is her other name, and Ishtar, Easter, kind of sounds similar, and it's
Yeah.
linguistics. But she also went by Astarte or Astaroth, and she was a fertility goddess. So she was the goddess of sensuality, fertility, pleasure. Um, and she, in the Canaan traditions, so Canaan being pre-Israelites, pre-Christians, which relates back to our Passover, because the descendants of Canaan were the Jews that left Egypt, and Canaan was said to be the promised land before the promised land. So we've got that link back around. But in Canaan traditions, she was the consort of Baal. Now, Baal, and this is interesting because we've not only demonized the feminine through these mythologies, we've also demonized the masculine in these mythologies. Baal has over time become Beelzebub, Lord of the Flies, one of the
Okay.
72 demons of the Asgoatia. But before that, he was, and he's also likened to Greek Kronos, Egyptian Set, Phoenician Melkarth, Sumerian Enlil and Adad. But he was a fertility god, a god of storms. And he was also like the god of the mountains, the goat king. So we get like this horned god um, image and epithet coming through, which leads us into a lot of our Celtic masculine
Yep.
fertility figures. But pretty much she descends to the underworld to see her sister shed her shadows. And there's also, she ends up sacrificing Dumuzi, which was her partner, after learning that he was unfaithful during her pilgrimage. And I found this interesting because it really links into the whole aspect of Judas in the Christian myths. And I just want to read out this little section that I have of her, which I found. So she descended to the underworld of Ker, hoping to impose her authority over Ereshkigal, who ruled there. She was admitted by Neti and removed one symbol of her power at each gateway. She was then killed and suspended from a stake. The gods sent two sexless beings to revive her and bring her back, but to rid herself of the demons that continued to harry her, she was required to provide a substitute for herself, and so sacrificed her husband Dumuzi, who had been unfaithful in her absence. So we get this masculine figure who comes through as a sacrificial offering to be shed of sin, to be shed of demons from Inanna after she has been killed and hung in the underworld and then resurrected. Yep. So I found that fascinating, being that
it will be hard push not to see some direct correlation between.
Exactly. And we see this in Egypt as well. Egypt, where Osiris is killed by Set, who to me is like the absolute equal of Judas. Set wanted what Osiris had.
Yep.
Set was never the favored son. Judas was never the favored apostle. And so in that fashion, they both betray him. Osiris is then chopped up in little pieces and buried under a tamarisk tree. Now, Tamar is actually translated into tree of life in a lot of traditions and translations, but Isis goes and finds Tamar, the tamarisk tree that he's buried under, brings him back together and conceives Horus, the child of light, who then goes to defeat Set. So again, we've got this resurrection, we've got this villain hero coming through to redeem the sins of others. And this even goes into ancient Greece with the mythology of Dionysus. Dionysus was conceived by Zeus with a lunar goddess, and on Hera's order was killed and divided up into pieces. But then he was also brought back together. And he, like Jesus, went throughout all the lands, learning wisdom and spreading wisdom until he come across Ariadne in the labyrinth. So we got this like cool masculine presence of resurrection and these cycles of life and rebirth happening again and again in these mythologies of antiquity, leading into the time of Jesus.
Yeah.
So when we try to say, and even with the egg, like the symbology of being birthed from the egg, one of the queens of heaven being known as Venus, there's an excerpt which says, an egg of wondrous size is said to have fallen from the heaven into the river Euphrates. Fish rolled it onto the bank where doves have settled upon it, and it hatched out and came Venus.
Okay, so we've got a lot of references throughout combined histories of resurrection, rebirth, sacrifice to remove sin.
Yep.
Or to escape sin.
Yeah,
I suppose whichever way.
To absolve.
So so I suppose what we're saying here is, geez, there's a lot to it. It's not just about whether someone has said that currently we believe it's based on spring. Easter translates to a spring goddess deity, or whether it comes from the Germanic form for the term of dawn.
To say that it is of pagan origins would only be correct in saying that it is of a polytheistic origin. It is from societies and cultures which honored many deities and many gods. And when you dissect Canaanite Israelite faith, they were also polytheistic. They just, the term monotheism isn't necessarily meaning we just walk with the one God, that is the only God that exists and no other God exists. In fact, it was the opposite. They honored other gods' existence, but they worshipped the one. They were dedicated to the one. That was their patron. Even God had a wife, Asherah, who was since wiped from the scripts, the Bibles.
Yep.
So
I suppose what it comes down to, people can, if you just want to hunt around the back garden for chocolate Easter eggs because it's a fun thing that you do with your kids, and it's just such joyful memories around it, knock your little cotton socks off, is what I say. if you're doing it for, sacred reasons around religion,
Yeah.
you know what? Knock your cotton socks off. I just would say that let's just be aware that there is an intermingling of thoughts and ideas, which may have come about through people feeling the need that they have to impose this link between everything. Like, I think it would be a fun task to pick a random ass, thing like a seashell or whatever. And
Yeah.
I think you'd be able to track that to have links to most major religions, most mythologies. I think we can make anything link the way we want it to link.
Yeah.
I just would say, don't be so certain and don't say, oh, it's come from here
Yeah.
or it's come from here, because ultimately it's a kind of irrelevant, I think, because the people who are celebrating it for the reasons they want to celebrate it.
Yeah.
Do you
I
know what I
think,
mean?
yeah, down when you get down to the bottom of it, it's a tradition of like the oldest traditions, which is honoring these cycles of life, death, and rebirth within nature through our animistic connections to animals and certain symbols like eggs.
Well,
And
you were saying, weren't you, earlier, that they buried eggs under
buried
the
eggs
ground.
in the ground to help the crops. And it
Yeah,
wasn't
so that's
until Dark Age Christianity came through and was like, that's a pagan practice, it's got to go. But eggs have calcium in the shells that help the soil.
yeah, it's a horticultural
The
process.
horticultural
It's
process. Did we not say these a lot of these things are happening around Neolithic is when we learned that we could grow things, we could plant things, we had some measure of influence over that, and we
yeah,
were connected to it. And these traditions arise from that needing to understand that a little bit more on a spiritual and physical level. So maybe that the egg it's like fucking asking, did the egg or the chicken come first?
yeah,
We know Jesus didn't come first, but he evolved from resurrection myths that are far older than him.
yeah.
The egg will ever be the question of the universe of what fucking came first. Yeah, at the end of the day, we just, when we have these traditions, we choose to honor them however symbolic they are to us and how that translates to us now. And we
Yeah.
honor our past traditions and respect where it came from without the need to be right.
Yes, and I think there needs to be some discernment around some of these people putting forward, not even beliefs, putting forward things as fact, that
Yeah.
it's definitely this and it's come from that. And the white hair in the Renaissance painting had to symbolize this. Well, unless you were standing beside the person painting it, or even more importantly, inside that person's head,
Yeah.
you have no idea what that symbolized. You
That's
just
just
do.
one interpretation of,
It's one interpretation, and the only person that will ever truly know is the artist.
yeah.
Because there's a lot of artists at that time that were playing games and putting hidden symbolism in what they were doing. So
Exactly.
to come back later and say, oh no, it was symbolizing this, was it?
And in
I would
Christian,
ask you, was it?
a lot of Christian architecture and artworks and things, there are lots of nods to our pre-Christian past and our pagan origins. I mean, we were talking about Sheila Nagig yesterday, being on the corners of churches, the green
Yeah.
thing. We've spoken about him in the past, nodding up. Like we are continuing to honor where we come from at our most base level as we've evolved as species on this planet through these traditions. And I think that's really just the basis of it.
Yep.
It doesn't belong to anybody, it belongs to everybody in that sense. There was
Yes.
no, I came up with this first. If one thing through life that I've realized is that there's no, we are not the original creators of anything.
Yes. There's no origin
Right
story that
at
has, yeah.
the back of history, unless we were there when the Big Bang happened, we didn't create shit. We might have had an idea, but that idea had to be influenced by something else. And, there's a lot of this copycat. They copied this, they took that. Of course they did. You provided a template, they embellished on it. I'm not approving of the ways that they did it. In fact, it could have been well and truly different. well and truly. There's some horrendous shit that's been done in the name of religion, and I think that's what the big wound that stirred up in this is
Yeah.
that these beliefs and traditions that families have passed down have either been taken or bastardized or just outright said they can't be practiced because someone else has said it belongs to them or it needs to be done this way. And that's the wound that Easter brings up.
Yeah.
For a lot of people. And we see that online in the pagan spiritual communities. Every time someone shared the little Instagram thing about the origins of a star, I'm like, I feel your pain. I recognize where it's coming from, but that information isn't right.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot more to it than just that. And please, if you see that, have a little bit of discernment and dig a bit deeper. Don't just share it.
Yes.
Fact
100%.
Fact check.
100%. All right, well, that was great. That was a really, really interesting topic.
Yeah.
I actually quite love that. I love the way they all interweave, and I feel like that doesn't take anything away from modern religion. I think it just gives it more substance. I really do.
Yeah.
So I actually love it. Okay. Next week, what are we talking about? That's what I was glancing off to the side before.
I don't have it in front of me.
I have it in front of me. We are doing Beware the Black-Eyed Children. Ooh, exploring urban folklore.
This is our shit. This is our shit.
Wowzers. Could we not have given ourselves an easier one to come up with after we've done Lemurians and Atlanteans and
oh my god, we've done a saga of just so many fucking topics that have just taken.
I gotta tell you, I'm rewatching. Have you watched the OA, the series?
Yes.
We were so right on some of our near-death experience stuff. Yeah. I'm rewatching it now and I'm like going, oh, bang on. Geez, we're good. So okay.
We must be fucking on to something here.
Okay, so Beware the Black-Eyed Children, exploring urban folklore. If anyone has any urban folklore they would like us to include in that particular episode, we're talking, all of the urban folklore that our horror movies have come from. That would include things like Slender Man. It would include lots of different things. We're going to go for the more creepier ones because when you talk Black-Eyed Children, you can't go anywhere but into the dark side. Yes. So we want to explore the dark side of urban folklore. So throw it out there if you've got anything.
We want to know.
Do we need to talk about what happened to the cat when it got into the chocolate Easter eggs?
Oh, fuck. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's like dogs where they just die. They take Easter real serious, apparently. But remember, curiosity may have killed a few cats. Because the cat was all like, fuck, you guys just, you took Easter too far. Like, I was just having a great time in Babylon making buns to Ishtar and drinking beer and, I had a chat with Dionysus and we ate some grapes and, I sat with Osiris under the tamarisk tree and was like, brother, tell me the secrets of the universe. And then we just came along and decided, oh, fuck no, you can't have eggs in the ground. Like, what's that shit about? Heaven forbid the soil grows. Heaven forbid we understand these cycles of life. Fuck, I might just go and, build myself a cross there. Hey, Jesus had it right, I think. I think I might just do that. But then he came back because he's got like fucking 9. At that point, he was on his like 3rd life or some shit. So, he had to come back to bring this message to you all to say that there's no growth in ignorant bliss.
Praise the cat. Praise Flufkins for the words of wisdom that we just got there.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll see everybody next week.
We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.